Beirut, 1974. A passionate crowd of Arabs gathers for the funeral of one of their former leaders. Mohammed Amin al-Husseini was a controversial figure throughout his life. A man whose decisions fundamentally affected the lives of his people. At just 26, he rose to claim the title Grand Mufti, the spiritual and political leader of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs. He is a character who, even now, polarizes opinion, particularly between Jews and Arabs. To many Jews, he is a man who collaborated with the Nazis and provides clear proof that all Arabs utterly despise them. He clearly supported the extermination of millions of Jews. In his own words, he said, "Kill the Jews wherever you find them. This pleases God, history, and religion." He even went as far as recruiting Muslims to form a special division of the dreaded SS.
The Mufti, as he himself acknowledged very clearly in his memoirs, was perfectly aware of the genocide. He was perfectly aware of the fact that the Nazis were perpetrating a genocide of European Jews.
But to Arabs, he was a man simply seeking to protect his people's rights to a territory that is now no longer theirs. In fact, to many, he was a prophet who foresaw the destruction of his homeland and only wanted to defend it. So what were his motives? How much did he really support Hitler and the Nazis' intentions towards the Jews? It's not simply a matter of history, as the Grand Mufti's actions and influence have had a significant impact on the Middle East of today. Mohammed al-Husseini's story is rooted in the period in the Middle East between the First and Second World Wars. Al-Husseini was born into a family of wealthy landowners in southern Palestine, near the holy city of Jerusalem, with a long and proud history. At the start of the 20th century, the whole region was largely under Muslim control, with around 400,000 Muslims and as few as 25,000 Jews. The land had been part of the massive Ottoman Empire for 400 years. But during the First World War, the empire was broken up and Palestine was controlled by the British.
The British occupied Palestine during the First World War. It didn't exist as a political entity under the Ottomans. But the British decided by the end of the First World War that they wanted to dismember the Ottoman Empire, and it was quite clear to them that Palestine was of tremendous strategic significance in terms of the need to protect Egypt and the Suez Canal from any potential aggressor.
During the First World War, the British had made explicit promises to the Arabs in the Middle East that they wanted a new era for the Arab people. They even sent out leaflets in Arabic, proclaiming that they fully supported the idea that Arabs should run their own countries. For al-Husseini and other politically motivated Palestinians, it meant that they were more than willing to help the British cause. Then, in November 1917, the British made a political move that has repercussions even today. They issued what became known as the Balfour Declaration. It stated that the British government now favoured the establishment in Palestine of a homeland for the Jewish people. So in other words, the declaration supported the idea of a country for the Jews. There was no reference to Arabs at all. For al-Husseini, the Balfour Declaration was devastating news. And it was this that would cause him to set out on the path that would ultimately lead him to collaborate with the Nazis. He wasn't prepared to stand by and see his homeland simply given away by the British. He decided to fight. During the Muslim festival of Nebi Musa in Jerusalem, an anti-Jewish riot broke out in protest at the Balfour Declaration.
This is the first case of large-scale violence between the two communities. El-Husseini, after the Nebi Musa riots, is accused, particularly by the Zionists, of orchestrating the entire thing. The commission that investigated the course of the riots certainly believed that el-Husseini had a part to play.
Afterwards, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison by a military court. But he avoided jail, as he'd already fled the country.
This figures as part of a larger narrative that he's a troublemaker, that the Palestinian Arabs would have been okay with Zionism if it wasn't for these extreme Palestinian Arab nationalist leaders like el-Husseini, who throughout the mandate continually drive them towards extremism and violence against the Zionists.
Then in July 1920, the British made a move that would give el-Husseini hope. They appointed their first High Commissioner to Palestine, Sir Herbert Samuel. It was an interesting choice.
He was a Liberal MP. He was the first Jewish member of the British cabinet. He was a high-profile politician. And during the First World War, he is the first person to submit a proposal to the British cabinet in support of the idea of the establishment of a Jewish state.
Despite his Zionist credentials, Samuel went out of his way to prove to the Arabs that although he was a Jew, above all else, he was fair. So he declared an amnesty for all Palestinian Arabs who had previously been sentenced by the British military. Still in exile at this point, el-Husseini could now safely return to his homeland. Then came another event that changed el-Husseini's life. His half-brother Kamal died suddenly. He was the Mufti of Jerusalem, the Palestinian Muslims' spiritual leader. His funeral was a lavish occasion attended by thousands. His death left a serious power vacuum in Jerusalem. It was a situation that the British had to resolve quickly. Samuel realized that if there was any chance of creating stability in the region, then the right person had to be appointed as the Mufti's successor. Samuel wasted no time in selecting Mohammed Amin al-Husseini to fill the role. To enhance the authority of their chosen man, the British suddenly bestowed a brand new title on him. Not only would he be the Mufti of Jerusalem, he would be the Grand Mufti of Palestine. That is the spiritual leader of not only Jerusalem's Muslims, but of all Muslims in Palestine. It was a job for which he was barely qualified.
The kind of education that would be relevant to the post of Mufti is, of course, religious education, theology. And he didn't achieve this. He started, but he interrupted to go to serve in the army in the First World War and never resumed this education. So he has to be someone who very much learned in the Islamic theology, and that was certainly not the case with Amin al-Husseini. So this person who was designated as the Mufti of Jerusalem and Grand Mufti of Palestine by the British authorities in 1921 was barely 26 years old, so very, very young person for the job.
He was such an unlikely choice that even his own people didn't think him fit for the job.
He was not even part of the 3 persons that were selected according to the normal procedure by the community of religious persons in Palestine for the job. So he was just picked by the British High Commissioner for Palestine, Herbert Samuel, who happens to be a Zionist himself, actually, who picked just Amin al-Husseini and designated him in this job. this job that the British authorities had renamed Grand Mufti of Palestine in order to stress the fact that this was the highest spiritual authority on the territory of their mandate.
But despite his lack of qualifications, al-Husseini took office on May the 8th, 1921. And from then onwards, his power and authority seems to keep on growing.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allah.
Within a year, he'd been elected president of the Supreme Muslim Council. At the age of just 26, he was now both the religious and political leader of the Arab community in Palestine, making him a hugely powerful player in the politics of the Middle East. At first, what looked like a high-risk appointment initially seemed to work. Al-Husseini worked hard to keep the peace. Towards the late 1920s, there were regular violent clashes between Palestinian Arabs and Jews. Jewish properties and even synagogues were attacked and destroyed. But the Grand Mufti was often seen attempting to restore order during the violence. Yet despite his attempts to keep the peace, there would soon be a dramatic turn of events that put him back on a collision course with the British. Those events occurred in Germany.
Sie wollte eine wahrhaftige Weltanschauungspartei sein. Und zweitens, sie wollte daher kompromisslos die einzige Macht und alleinige Macht in Deutschland.
By March 1933, support for Adolf Hitler was growing at an unstoppable speed. He'd risen to take total power over the country. He brought democracy to an end, and now, for the first time as dictator, he turned his attention to his driving and overall ambition, the destruction of the Jews. In 1933, the number of Jews in Palestine rose to 209,000.
Because of the explosion of Zionist immigration in the beginning of the 1930s, this leads to, as a result, an explosion of Palestinian Arab anger and resentment. This is the real challenge for al-Husseini and other Arab leaders at the time. And as the Palestinian Arab population becomes more radicalised because of the situation in Palestine in the 1930s, by the middle of that decade, things really are clearly out of the control of the Palestinian Arab elite.
By 1937, the number of Jews had risen again. The figure now stood at 396,000. But rather than the Mufti blaming the Germans for this influx, the German Consul General in Palestine, Heinrich Wolf, informed the Führer that Palestinian Muslims were making sympathetic noises towards the new Nazi regime. New Jewish communities with extensive building programs were continuing to populate Palestine. But news for the Arab population was about to get even worse. In London, the British government rejected a demand made by al-Husseini and other Arab leaders for an official council, designed to give them more control over their homeland. It was a bitter blow to their hopes of establishing a group to represent the views of the wider Palestinian Arab population.